Thank you everybody for joining us. In today's webinar, I'm basically going to walk you through the interface, how some things work, just give you a better understanding, give you a greater comfort level in working with the application. We're going to be working with, initially with this image. This is a sunrise on the beach. And this was my before picture in camera. And let's see if I can get to there we go. That will be the after image once we play with it in Luminar. And as you can see, it really just pops. Now, to open an image in Luminar, you can simply go down to Dock on a Mac, start up on Windows, and click on it, and you will have the option to open any file. And of course, you can also drop it directly on the application icon. And then you'll be inside of Luminar. Now, I wanted to, again, this is the finished image because I want you to see where we can come from and where we go. So once you're inside Luminar, and we're going to just give you a quick walkthrough on the interface, on the upper left-hand corner is where you would open an image. If you want to open a different image, you can simply drop that down and you can open specific images. And you'll also notice it has a batch processing option. And this allows you to have the ability, if you have multiple images that you might have shot at the same location or in the same environment, you can batch process them to stylize them exactly how you stylized your first image. So that's one of the key things in how you open it up. You also have the ability to look at before and after, and this is pretty useful. And whenever I'm working in Luminar, I always like to remember where I came from, what my original image looked like. It gives me a little bit of perspective. So there's two buttons up here in the middle. One is a way to look at the original image, and you just do that by clicking on it and then let go, and you can see the after. Another nice way to view the before and after is the compare option. And if I click on that, I actually get a split screen which I can move, and I can see what my original image looked like and what my processed image looks like. You'll notice that I straightened this image a little bit because I was really picky about my horizon. But this is a nice feature because a lot of times when we're developing an image, we kind of go a little bit overboard because our eyes get adjusted to the way it looks on our screen at that moment. And we have to be reminded where it came from. And sometimes we have to dial things back. So that gives us a little idea. Now, I do want to point out a couple of other features before I reset this image. And that is up here, again, in the top middle part of the screen, a little bit over to the right. You have your undo button, and that's standard. That would be Command-Z on a Mac, or Control-Z, or Control-Z and Command-Z on a PC versus a Mac. So you can always step back one edit at a time if you want to fix something. But this is a very unique feature to the right, and that's the history panel. And I intentionally opened this image that I had already worked on because I want to show you that with Luminar, you can go back all the way to the very moment you opened the original document and see every single filter you applied, every single preset you might have played with, as well as what setting you placed your sliders to. And this is great because I can step back and look at my image at a certain point in my edit. Here it was before I did the crop. I had just started working on the sky. And then I could go ahead and try different features. I added the tone feature. And what's really nice about this is that with the history panel, not only can I go back to the beginning, but if I save this as a Luminar project file, and we'll talk a little bit about saving and exporting in the latter half of the webinar, Luminar actually saves all of this history. And that's really, really nice because I can open my project a week later or a month later, and I can still step back in time and see what I did, or maybe see where I might have made a mistake. So that's a very unique feature, and it's one that I really like, and I wanted to point that out. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to go back to the current point in time. And this is the finished product. And I want to talk a little bit about the interface. At the very bottom of the interface are presets, and there is a variety of presets that come bundled with Luminar. And then we've had additional presets that you can download from our website. And Laurie will point out where you can get those at the end of the webinar. And what presets allow me to do is I can do quick fixes or try things out. So you notice the categories. Here's one for outdoor. Here's one for dramatic. Here's one for magic hour. So if we go ahead and I'll switch to magic hour, and I can apply different presets to my original image. As a matter of fact, just to show you that it's the original image, I'm going to go ahead and go all the way back to the very moment that I open this up. There we go. There's my original image. And I can try these different presets that I downloaded. Now, the nice thing about presets in Luminar is that they're not truly fixed. If I apply a preset, I have a couple of choices. Actually, I have many choices. First of all, I can control with this slider in the preset exactly how much influence that preset has on the original image. It kind of just pulls down the opacity. So if I like a preset, but it's a little too over the top, I can go ahead and modify that. Now, if we look over to the right side of your screen, you'll notice that when I switch presets, and I'll switch presets again so you can see this change, Luminar has applied a variety of filters with their settings onto the image. And the nice thing is even though you've applied a preset, you still have the flexibility to modify any of the sliders. So if I think, for instance, the saturation, and the saturation's in the bottom right-hand corner of my screen, and I think it's just a little too saturated, I could dial that down. So not only can I apply a preset and control how much that preset affects the image, I can always go in and modify any of the filters to tweak the image exactly the way I want. Now, I told you that I would show you another option, so I'm going to go over here, instead of sunrise, give it a twilight look. And you'll notice the image changes, and if you were really quick, you'll notice that the sliders changed a little bit to give it a different look. And this is great. Literally, I can go from sunrise to twilight with a few clicks. So that's the whole idea behind presets. And I really like working with them because it's quick, it's easy, it makes my images look really nice. But there are times that I want full control over developing my image. I'm going to go ahead and hide the presets for now because there's really not a need to see them. And if you go over to the upper right-hand corner of my screen, there's two little buttons here. You can see they're orange. The one on the left will hide or show the preset panel. So by clicking that, the preset panel is now out of the way. I can really focus on developing my image. Now you'll notice the preset is still applied. So I'm going to go ahead and under the filters menu, I'm going to simply delete all of the filters that the preset applied. So this is what the image looked like when I opened it. And I can now start saying, how do I want to fix this? I want to add some filters. So I'm going to go over here to the right side. There's a little button, the blue button on the right side, and I'm going to click on Add Filters. And what you'll see here is a list of all the filters that come bundled with Luminar. And I'm going to scroll to the top, and we'll work with these initially, but you have just your basic filters if you want to develop the image, and developing basically allows you to increase or decrease the exposure and the contrast. I can focus on just, bringing information or bringing light into my shadows. If I have areas of my image that are too bright, I can bring down my white levels. I can bring down my shadows. And for those of you who are new to developing or new to Luminar, it could look a little overwhelming about, well, what filter do I use? And I want to point out a couple of things. When you hover over any filter, you have the option to see a little description of what that filter does. And that's really nice when you're just playing around. And at the end of the webinar, Laurie is going to show you where there are a lot of resources where you can learn even more. We have a lot of training on the site, And a lot of that training explains how different luminaries, different photographers, famous photographers, use Luminar to fix their pictures, and not just showing you a button, but explaining why they use a certain slider. So that's actually very exciting. So let's go ahead and look at some of the key filters that I like to start with. The first filter that I often try is this filter called Accent AI. And basically the AI stands for artificial intelligence. So what I do is I'll apply this, and it only has one slider. So when I click to apply it, it gets thrown onto the right side. And you'll notice there's only one slider. It just says boost. And the AI filter isn't like a quick fix filter that you're probably used to. It actually analyzes the image, looking for sky, looking for foreground, looking for foliage, looking for people. It can identify about 10 or 12 different kinds of things in your image and applies appropriate or best guess corrections based on that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the boost and just move it over. And you'll notice as I move it over, my image does improve. It's not as exciting as it was when I first showed you, because that's a few filters, but this is what the boost will do. And again, when I want to compare these, I'll go to that split screen on the very top of my image, and you can see this is the before and this is the after. And if you notice, it opened up, the luminance on the rocks, and it kind of gave a little more structure to the water, but it didn't really like blow out the skies like I just used an exposure slider. And that's one of the things I really like about it. It made the sky a little bluer, but it didn't destroy the look of the image. Let me go ahead and turn that off. So the AI filter is a great filter to play with. Sometimes it does amazing things, and sometimes it's very subtle, like in this case. Now, I had put the develop filter on, and I had spoken about that, and I just kind of want to give you an idea of how you might use it and its power. So let me go ahead, and I want to show you something. It's a couple of little triangles that are up here in the histogram, and that histogram is in the upper right-hand corner. It's that multicolored graph. It basically shows me the number of different color pixels throughout the mid-range and the highs and the low. Won't go into that detail, but I do want to point out that if I click on these little triangles, and if you click on the histogram, it will switch between red, green, and blue. And there's a triangle on the right and the left. And what that allows me to do is if I darken my image, okay, so I'm going to go down here to the blacks, and I just want to make my blacks nice and rich. If I go overboard, you start seeing these little blue highlight indicators, and that says I've lost all detail, I've crushed the blacks. And what I want to do is I want to get the widest dynamic range, the best darks and the best highlights in my image without losing any detail. And that's what those little triangles allow me to do. They let me visualize exactly where that point is that I start losing detail. I can do the same thing with the white point. As I move it to the right, it will brighten my image, and you'll notice in the very right-hand corner or right-hand side of my image, I'm starting to see some red, and that's where I'm losing detail in the sunrise. I'm actually losing the sun. So I'm going to pull that back just a little bit till the red kind of goes away. I'm going to leave a little teeny red dot here because the other two sliders that I use are the the shadows and the highlights. If I grab the shadow slider, I can brighten up the shadows without losing that rich black area. So I'm just going to move it up, and you can see the ground's lightening up, but the image still has a lot of punch. And the same thing is true of the highlights. If I click on the highlights, I can bring it down to the left, and you'll notice that I can get back that overblown area where the sun is. So just playing with these sliders, and I'm going to add a little contrast. Contrast tends to add punch. And let me give you a hint on how I like to learn an application or how I like to work with a slider. I basically look at a slider and I move it all the way to the extremes. So if I go to the left, I can see, oh, that's what extreme contrast or extreme lack of contrast would do. And you notice the image doesn't have a lot of punch. It's a style, not the style that I want. You'll also notice that the histogram looks a little different. And then I might go back and say, well, what happens if I add a lot of contrast? And I yank it all the way to the right. In addition to losing some detail in my blacks, it does have a lot more punch. It does have a lot more saturation, but it's a little too much. So when you're learning this application or any application, instead of just like following, like typing in a number, go ahead and play with the sliders and see what it does. And remember, you can always undo. I can always go back into my history. Okay, as you can see, this is what we've done since I reset the image. Everything from trying the different presets to now playing with these different sliders. So I like where the image is going. When I play with the contrast, I can see I crushed some of my black area, so I'll open that up a little bit. And I like that. And then I'm going to play with clarity. And clarity is one of those sliders that a lot of people are like, well, exactly what is it doing? And technically, it's improving the contrast of the colors in the mid ranges. And it gives a greater sense of clarity to the image. So as you can see, it does give me a lot more pop. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my little triangles in the upper right-hand corner because I don't need that distraction now. I know the image is balanced how I like it. And now I'm ready to start playing with the image to see how I can enhance it. And when I'm working with a sky filter, one of the filters I really like to use is something called the polarizing filter. And some of you may be familiar with that if you've used a polarizing filter when taking a shot. What it does is it filters out the scattered blue light and gives you more parallel blue light. Technical. But in reality, what it does is it makes your skies bluer. So if I put on the polarizing filter, this is as if I put it on when I shot the image, and then I can go ahead and I can move the amount up till I like what it does to the sky. And I really do like what it did with the sky. Again, if I want to see what the before and after is, I don't always have to go up to the center of the screen, the top center of the screen. What I can do, and I like the fact I can do this on a filter by filter basis, is I can click on this little eyeball to the right of the word polarizing filter. And this will simply deactivate that filter. And then I click on it again and I can reactivate it. So as you can see, we actually are getting a nice pop to this sunset. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that on. And then I'm trying to figure out what other things do I want to do with this image. Well, maybe I want to punch up the saturation and vibrance. And let me explain saturation and vibrance. I'm going to go ahead and apply it. And you'll see there's two sliders down here. It's in the bottom right-hand corner of my screen. And most people are familiar with saturation. And what saturation does, and I'm going to move this slider all the way to the right, to the extreme, is it saturates every color in my image. And sometimes that gives a really unnatural feel. So I'm going to go ahead and reset that. I could drag it to the middle, but if you simply double click on the dot, it will reset back to neutral. I want to talk about what vibrance is, because vibrance is like smart saturation. What it does, if something is less saturated, it will add more saturation to that color, to that part of the image. And if it's already saturated, it doesn't affect it as much. So it kind of evens out the saturation and is much more natural. This is great, especially if you're shooting people and you want to brighten up the saturation of everything in the image without making people's faces like bright red. So I use vibrance a lot when I'm doing portraits. So I'm going to go ahead and move that up. And this gives me just a nice, rich feel. And sometimes what I like to do is actually pull down the saturation and pull up the vibrance, and that evens out the color in my image. Let's take a look at that in a before and after mode. That's the before, that's the after. It's subtle. I could push it a little bit more, but I want this to look really pretty, but I also want it to look a little more natural. Let's take a look at some of the other really cool filters that are very unique in Luminar. If I wanted to give this more of a golden feel, and the truth is it's the morning, so it wasn't that golden, but if I wanted to pretend it's more of a sunset than a sunrise, I could go ahead and apply the golden hour. And again, with all of these filters, you can control how much it affects the image. And this gives a whole different feel to this image. It's turning the water a little bit purple, but it's giving the sky a feel that I really like. And again, one thing I love doing is what was my before, and as you can see, this was pretty but kind of dull. This really does pop. So let's go ahead and take off the split screen, and I want to tweak this just a little bit more. For instance, I'm not really a big fan of the color toning that's happening in the foreground. And I have a lot of ways that I can fix this. I can go down, and a couple of the other sliders down here, a couple of the other filters, allow me to control top and bottom lighting. So if I wanted the ground to be darker, if my sky was a little blown out, I could do that. I can also, if I want, do things such as split color warmth. So if I do split color warmth, and I like doing this in some images, though probably not the best one for this, is I can even warm up the golds, and a lot of times I can cool off the sky and it makes it richer. So that's pretty good, but I still haven't fixed this little dilemma I have here in reference to a little bit too much saturation on the bottom part of the image. And I can fix that, as I said, a couple of ways. One thing I can do is I could go back to this saturation and the golden hour. And as you can see, if I turn that off, it gets a little bit better. And this is really one of the ones that does it, my golden hour. I want to point out something. If I only want to apply a filter to just part of an image, I can do that by creating what's called a mask. Some people refer to it as a matte. It basically says I can paint in my filters or perhaps paint out my filters. And to do that, I would simply click on this little brush over to the right. And if I click on that brush, it will turn orange. And I can either get a brush to paint areas out. So for instance, I'll show you, I'll grab the brush. And as soon as I grab the brush, I get changes in the upper part of my screen. You'll see where my cursor is. There's the word paint. There's also the word erase. I also have control for how big the brush is, how soft it is, or hard the edge is, and also has how opaque or translucent it is. So it's very easy for me to change the size of my brush. If you do come from the world of Photoshop, the same keyboard shortcuts that you would have in Photoshop or Lightroom, and by the way, we play really nicely with Photoshop and Lightroom. Luminar is a standalone application, and you could stay in here the whole time. But if you want, you can actually export to Lightroom or Photoshop, or if you're inside of Photoshop or Lightroom, you can actually use Luminar as a plugin, step inside Luminar, use its great filters, and then step back inside of Lightroom or Photoshop. So the nice thing is we play really well together. So what I want to do is I just want to paint the golden hour in on the sky. And I'm going to use a brush just so you can see. And I would just, if you notice, as soon as I started painting, it returned back to its original color. Let me actually undo that so you can see it again. So I'm going to go back to the brush. So now everything is being affected by my golden hour. And then I'm going to make my brush bigger, because that's less work for me. And I'm simply going to paint. And as soon as I click, what I'm doing is I'm painting in the golden hour on the top part, but I'm leaving the bottom part to be a much more natural color. And I really like that a lot. So this is the before. And let's see if we can, I'll turn off. Well, actually, I want to show one thing here. The wonders of live. I forget to do things. if I click on the little eyeball here, it's the / key, the key underneath your question mark, it will show me what area of my image I'm actually affecting by this filter. And let me just make sure I got that nicely painted. Should I get the sun because that's what I want? Get the tip of the mountains, and now I can click that off, and we can see my before and after, and you see it just affects the sky. So the image is coming along to where I really like it. I like the feel of it. I think I want to do one thing here. It was pretty dark. This was about 5 a.m. in the morning, and was really pushing my camera. And I have some noise, and I mean, the clouds are definitely broken up, but there's a little bit of noise there. So I want to fix that. And I have a couple of filters that are readily available to me. One of them is a denoise filter. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll up here to issue fixers. There we have denoise, and I can click on that. And as you can see, I now have a slider where I can fix the noise based upon the luminance, the brightness in the image. Think of it, the black and white parts. And I also can decrease the noise in the color area, the color noise, where the pixels don't really match the pixels next to them. And this does a little bit of the improvement that I want, but I still feel I want a smoother sky. So what I can use is I can use something called structure. And, it's interesting because people think of structure and you can see from the little pop-up, it enhances clarity, and which isn't what I want, but I'm going to put it on anyway. And I'm going to show you what happens when you move the slider to the right. You get this really cool, almost HDR look, but it's not really cool for this image. But I can move this slider to the left, and it's going to act as a softening agent to this image. So now my sky is really smooth. And I'm going to once again use a mask because I want the sky to be smooth, but I want some real sharpness to happen here. So what I can do is I'm going to go over, I'm going to click on the brush. Now, before what we did is we painted it in. Okay, so I could just go ahead and paint the water. I could also erase. So here I have the filter on, and when I click on erase, now when I start painting, and I really don't want my structure to be here, but I want it everywhere else, when I click and paint, as I move my cursor over it, I start removing, and I'm going to make this smaller with the left bracket key. I bring that sharpness back in, and you can see if I click on the little eyeball to show where my mask is, where it is red is where the filter is being applied, and where it is not red is where it's being left alone, and that's kind of what I want to do. I'm losing a little more detail than I want in the rocks, and this would be where I might use the opacity control on my brush. And I'm going to just bring it down to like maybe 30%, and that way it's 30% opaque, so that when I paint on here, and I'm going to just paint one line and turn on the little red eyeball, you can see that I'm not truly erasing everything, but I'm making it a little more translucent, and that's going to let some of that sharpness through, so it's not as smooth as the sky, which I want to be nice and smooth. I do want a little bit of a tactile sense to my rocks. And this image is starting to turn out to the image that I really like. Again, I would look at the before, I look at the after. To me, this is really going to catch the eye of people. And at this point, maybe I want to do a little bit of cropping. So I want to make sure that the image is the shape that I want for the use that I want. So let me go ahead and I'm going to click on the Add Filters button. And all that does is turn off that side thing. Excuse me a second. Hard talking 30 minutes nonstop without a cough. Plus, it gives you a chance to kind of breathe. I do want to point out that I am going a little bit fast. We record these webinars So if you don't get something, you can play back a webinar. We already have an intro done. So literally after this, if you want to watch that, Laurie will show you how to find that. But what I want to do now is I want to work on cropping this image to really give it some balance. And one of the things that, it's nice, but it doesn't follow the rule of thirds. I think there's too much sky in this image. So to crop, I would simply go under the Tools drop-down menu. That's in the upper right-hand side of the interface. Right here is Tools, and this is where you would see several features. Crop is what we're going to use now, but Luminar has a couple of other very useful features. It has a clone and stamp tool and an erase tool. So if I have unwanted objects in my image, so if there was a person walking on the beach and I wanted to remove them, very easy to do with the erase tool or the clone tool. But for right now, I want to crop the image. So I'm going to go ahead and click on crop. Keyboard shortcut would be C. I like the fact that the keyboard shortcuts tend to mirror uh, the word crop C. If you look at that, transform, Command T, Control T. So when I put crop on, I get these bounding boxes, and I can just go ahead and crop it how I want. And the truth is I kind of like the way it looks here. And you'll notice there's even a grid which helps you see the rule of thirds. There's actually a couple of grids you can overlay. It's the little white grid, and I use this a lot because I don't like really balanced images unless that's the exclusive intent of the shot. So I like the way this looks. I can go ahead and accept that by simply hitting the Enter or Return key. And now I have an image that works a little better for me. I do want to show you actually one of the crop settings that I use a lot actually. We're going to go back up to Tools. We're going to click on Crop. Over here in the upper left-hand corner, when you have crop open, there's a thing that says aspect, and you see it says free. What I can do is if I click on that drop down, I can change my aspect ratio of my crop if I know, for instance, I'm going to put out, say, an 8:10 image. So 4:5 is the same as an 8:10. Or if I'm going to make a 5:7 image. Or if I want to do a square image for, say, Instagram. But this I think is pretty slick. I like this picture. I want to make it the exact same size that I would need for a Facebook cover. And I never remember what that aspect ratio is, but if I click on that, it will automatically adjust this so that now if I send this to Facebook, it will fit perfectly into that aspect ratio. So that's actually a lot of fun, and I use that a lot. But I'm going to go ahead and change out of that. I'll click on Reset and bring it back down to what I like. I think a little bit less foreground would be great. And I can position that and hit Return. And now I'm working with a panorama that isn't necessarily the Facebook shape, but is aesthetically what I like in this image. So as you can see, I started with something very, very different, and I was able to pull this out. And if I wanted to, I did point out that I wanted to straighten this image. So I can do that in a couple of places on a Mac. On a Windows machine, it would also be here under the Develop module. And if you look, we've been on a panel that says Adjust, and that's where we did the highlights and the shadows and whatnot. But there's also one that says Lens and Transform. And I'm going to just quickly click on that just so you can see what's underneath that tab. And under Lens, if I had shot this with, say, a GoPro or a real wide-angle lens and it was distorted, I could go ahead and compensate for some of that distortion. I'm just moving my sliders all the way to the left and right. So that's really nice. And also you can fix things such as chromatic aberration, which you get sometimes on the edges of an image based on the lens, or if you have a high contrast area where the whites are blown out, you'll see some fringing. You can fix all that. But what I want to do is go to Transform. And the Transform is a very powerful area where I can actually, if I need to fix distortion, maybe I was shooting something really low a building and I want to fix the distortion. But all I want to do here is I just want to go over to horizontal and just fix like about, I don't know, one or two, and that's not actually, it's not horizontal. It is rotate. So if I go to rotate, and I just move it a little bit, I can even it out so that that horizon is perfectly straight. Whether that's the case or not from the angle I was shooting, I don't know, but I like it aesthetically stylized like this. So I think I just want to show you a couple of other things in the interface to get you comfortable. I want to show you how to save and export, and then I'm going to throw it back to Laurie, who will give you some more information and will also address some questions. So once I have my picture the way I like it, or actually the truth is, I do this as soon as I start to edit. I would go under File and I would do a save, okay? And when I do that, I'll give this a name, and I don't want to save over the one that I actually opened up at the beginning, so we'll do this webinar. And what this will do is it will save it as a Luminar project file. And that would look something like this. This is the icon. This is the JPEGs that I got out of it. And what's inside your Luminar project file is the original image, so that if I move this to another computer, I have the full resolution image inside this package, and I have all the modifications and all the history saved, so I can open that up. So that's what you'll see when you do a save, and you save it as a Luminar file. Now, if I want to get files that I can show people or upload, I would simply go to one of two places. You can go to File and Share to, not Share to, Export. Share to lets me send, actually, let me go to Share to. So much I want to tell you in the only short hour that we have. But this is kind of nice. You can share directly to any of the social media locations right out of the box. So if you want to send it up to your 500px account or throw it to Facebook or email it to somebody, you can do that. You can also export it. And what export will do is it will allow you to save your image in a variety of file formats. You can save it as a JPEG, a PNG, Photoshop documents, PDF files, and in my case, I want to save this as a TIFF. And the nice thing about a TIFF file is I can make sure that the color space and the color depth are exactly what I want. So color space, that would be something right here, and it depends on where you're sending it to or a printer. The default is sRGB. If this is too techy for some folks, when you ask somebody what they want the image in, and they tell you, you can choose that. Otherwise, leave it to the defaults. And then the difference here between 8 and 16 bits is, again, it's a larger file, but it has a lot more color detail, less banding, which is really nice if you're going to print an image. If I want to keep it simple, JPEG, I can determine, how compressed it is with the quality, and then simply hit Save. And this will now export a JPEG of my finished image. So it's two ways that you can save something and the way you can export it. And at this point, what I'm going to do is throw it back to Laurie to point out where we can get some of these presets, additional presets for those of you who are using the trial or have bought it, and also where you can get other educational resources, other webinars and training videos and quick tips. So Laurie, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Abba. Hey, while we got your screen up there, I've got 3 questions that came in for you.
Okay.
The first one, since we're talking about presets, would you mind going to the categories section under presets? That would be awesome.
So I need to, once again, open that up. That's the little button here in the upper right-hand corner. And now that I have my presets panel open, I have my categories.
Great. And they want to see where to get more presets. If you just click on that. There we go. So this is actually going to pull up our web page here, and you can get a bunch of free presets and also presets that you can pay for. And we're continually adding more probably about 2 sets of Luminar and 1 set of Aurora each month. So be sure to come back and check this out. Perfect. So it's real easy. Just download, click on download. It will download to wherever you want it to go. And then you just double click on it and it'll automatically install into your program. So super easy. So take advantage of those preset packs. Thanks, Abba. Okay, next question here. Let's kind of scroll through here. Okay, Martin is asking, please compare the controls in develop versus the individual controls in the utility filter. So
let me go ahead and open up the filters. And I believe the utility is at the, it is.
Yeah.
Utility is at the bottom. So some of these are overlap. So for instance, if I go in and I go to exposure and apply that, you'll see it's basically the same exposure slider that I have at the top. And if I went to whites and blacks, it's again the same thing. But here's the difference. When you apply a develop filter, it will always put the develop filter at the very top of the tree. So if I go through and I apply that develop folder 4 steps in, it will still put it at the top because the first step usually is to develop. But if I want to correct something later on in my workflow, I have the ability to put on these filters and they can be placed exactly where I want them. As a matter of fact, I can take any filter other than the develop filter, grab it, and just simply slide it up or down if I wanted to work in a different part of the workflow. So there are some that are definitely repetitive or overlap, and there are some that are unique. For instance, top and bottom lighting I love. If you click on that, what it allows me to do is, if I wanted to, bring down the luminance in the bottom, and I can brighten up the sky, or maybe I want the sky to be a little richer and the ground. And this is cool. Underneath that, there's a little space that says Set Orientation. If I click on that, I can position exactly where I want the horizon to be and how much I want that to feather, how the gradient is between that area. So the top and bottom lighting is something that's unique. So some of these are unique, and some of these overlap with what's in the develop module, but it allows you to position them exactly where you want.
Perfect. Thanks, Abba. Okay, last question that we can take here. Diane is asking, what is structure? Can you show the structure filter?
Sure can. So what structure does, it actually adds a lot of sharpening. It's great if you want to do, add kind of like an HDR or a grungy look. So let me go ahead and do that. Let me turn off this top and bottom lighting. So if I added structure to this image, and the problem with adding structure to this image is I did have a lot of noise, but what it does is it kind of makes it crisper and crunchier, kind of gives the appearance of it being sharper, okay? If you really push it too far, it becomes a little unnatural. But for some images, like if I did a cityscape, sometimes I really pop the structure because I want it to feel really crisp and defined. So that's the primary use of structure. I use the opposite. I actually softened the image with structure, and that allowed me to smooth out some of the areas, gave me a smoother sky. And then, of course, you can control, softness controls how it sees the adjacent pixels and affects the adjacent pixels for adding that structure. And as I said, another way I use it is if I am shooting an individual, a person, and I want to smooth out their skin, I'll apply structure and then bring it into the left, to the negative, to soften, and then I'll actually paint in like I painted in and painted out with the masks to soften just, say, their skin, but keep everything else in the image sharp.
Very good. Thank you so much. Okay, folks, I'm going to go ahead and switch the screen over to me, and I'll show you where some resources are that you can find. And you should be able to see on the screen the Skylum website. So if you go to skylum.com, what I recommend doing is clicking on the menu. There's a drop-down menu here. And this is where you can get access to everything you ever wanted to know about Luminar and also Aurora. So if you click on Luminar 2018, I'm going to go ahead and click on that first link there. This will talk about some Luminar stuff. Some of the questions that I got today were, what are some of the differences or similarities between the Windows and Mac version of Luminar? And so if you scroll all the way to the bottom, I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom. Here's our tech requirements, and then go up one section. We've got some really handy charts here. For those of you who use Lightroom and you want to compare the differences between Luminar 2018 and Lightroom, you can click on that. For several of those that asked today about the comparisons between the Mac and PC version of Luminar, click on Compare, and we have a nice chart here. So you can see we're almost completely matched up. Just a few things coming up. Okay. One of the other things that I find is really, really helpful, and that's the user guide. So if you just scroll down, again, that drop-down menu to user guide, you'll see that there's a Mac and a Windows version. Richard Harrington put this together, did a fantastic job, and you can go ahead and click on anything that you're interested in. Filters, presets, so there's even keyboard shortcuts here for those of you who might want to use some keyboard shortcuts. Now, what I would recommend doing is scroll down all the way to the bottom again. Let's see, go ahead and download the PDF format. This, to me, is just an easier, quicker way to do searches. So if you want to find something real quickly, you can go ahead and click on the PDF file format. And we do have a Windows version there as well. So very handy. Anything you ever wanted to know about Luminar and more is here. You did a great job. Okay, so scrolling down here now, Abba and I are in the education department, and our goal in life is to make sure that you folks know how to use your product, use Luminar to its best. And so we're constantly making new videos and also some articles and tutorials. We also have some great content creators that are helping us out as well. So one of the places I would recommend for further education is this video gallery. I'll go ahead and click on that link. And in here, we've got a bunch of videos, everything from when you're first starting out installing on a Mac or a PC. You can see those quick starts, they're in blue. Here's some fast knowledge if you want some information on blending modes, which is a great thing to know about. Speed editing for landscape. I know a gentleman was asking about workflow for landscapes. That might be a good one there. We also record our webinars. So we've got some great speakers. So for instance, Nicole Young, we've got Matthew Jordan Smith and many more coming up. So you might want to check out webinars from some of our inspirational ambassadors and influencers. And we also have inspiration as far as different genres or types of photography you might be interested in, using LUT mapping, which is a really big thing these days, is to be able to colorize your images, which is great. And keep on scrolling down. There's lots and lots of videos. And like I said, we're adding more and more every day. Okay, another spot I'd recommend for more good educational content is blog. So in here, we've got videos, we have blog posts that explain maybe something that you might be interested in, and even more than just our products, we talk about photography as well. So there might be something that you're interested in. For instance, for those of you who might be getting ready to go to Venice Carnival, you can click on this and get some nice tips on how to shoot there while you're there. So lots of good information. Again, under that blog section, you'll be able to find more information there. Okay, let me see if I'm missing anything here. There's tons of stuff here. This is the store marketplace where Abba showed you where you can find your presets. And also, you might want to check out our ambassador team. This is our current ambassadors right now. Some fantastic, just top of the line, the best out there photographers, and they're using our products. You might want to take a look at what they have to say there as well. Okay, Abba, I think I've got most of this covered. If you have any questions or answers that you need, just go ahead and click on that, or you can ask our support team, support@skylum.com, and they'll be able to answer any questions that you have. All right, any last words, Abba?
No, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to attend this, and I want you to just go and play with the application, and you can't break it. So play with the sliders, try different things. You can always undo. You can always use the history to go back to the beginning. And just have fun playing with your pictures and making some magic.
Yep. And be sure to join our Facebook groups, by the way. Skylum Photography is on Facebook, and lots of people are posting their images every day. And you never know, we could pick one of yours to showcase. So be sure to check that out as well. Okay, everyone, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again real soon. And thanks, Abba, for your great presentation.
Thank you.